The photograph landed on Amara Whitfield's desk at 11:47 p.m., and by 11:48 her hands had gone cold. It showed a teenage girl huddled outside a restaurant in the rain, a boy holding an umbrella over both their heads. She knew that girl's face better than she knew her own reflection most mornings, because it was hers. 15 years buried, and someone had just mailed it to her office with a single typed line beneath it: "Walk away from the Cho case, or the whole city learns exactly who you used to be." 6 floors above her, the man in that photograph was asleep, believing his family's legacy was finally safe. He had no idea the woman defending it was the same girl he'd once given an umbrella to, and never found again. If that first line just made your stomach drop, you are exactly where you need to be. Drop where in the world you're watching from in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and like this video, because Amara is about to relive the night that made her who she is, and it's about to collide with the men she can't stop thinking about. Amara was 32, russet brown skin, a crown of tightly coiled black hair she kept twisted back in a low knot for court, and a build people described as statuesque without quite knowing why the word fit her so naturally. She simply took up space like she'd earned the right to. She was the youngest senior associate at Bregman & Co., the kind of black woman other black women in that building watched climb with quiet, fierce pride, because everyone knew what it cost her to get there. What almost no one knew was that at 17, she'd spent 4 months homeless on the Upper East Side after her father's small import business collapsed overnight, and that a stranger's kindness during the worst winter of her life was the only reason she survived it. She'd built her entire adult identity as a wall around that winter. Now someone was threatening to knock the wall down in open court. The client she'd been threatening to walk away from was Kian Cho, 34, chairman-elect of Cho Dynasty Holdings, a Solan, New York conglomerate his father had built from a single shipping contract into an empire. Kian had sharp black hair he ran his hand through when he was thinking too hard, an angular, quietly handsome face, and the careful formality of a man raised speaking 2 languages and revealing his true feelings in neither. His father had died 3 months earlier, and his estranged half-uncle, Tae-ho Cho, was contesting the will, claiming the old man had been manipulated in his final weeks by a son too eager to inherit. Amara had taken the case because it was the kind of career-making win that could make partner. She hadn't expected Kian Cho to make her forget, for entire stretches of a workday, that this was supposed to be strictly professional. "You're doing it again," he said one night, 3 weeks into trial prep, both of them alone in a glass conference room lit only by desk lamps and the city outside. "Doing what?" Reading the same line of deposition transcript for the 4th time without turning the page. A small, tired smile. "You do that when you're avoiding something." She hated that he'd noticed. She hated more that she liked being noticed by him. "I'm not avoiding anything. I'm being thorough." "Counselor," he said, "you forget I've watched you cross-examine a hostile witness for 2 hours without blinking. This is not thoroughness. This is Ms. Whitfield stalling." His eyes held hers a beat too long. "You can tell me, you know. Whatever it is." She almost did. The words sat right at the edge of her mouth. "Someone sent me a photograph tonight, and it's the worst night of my life, and somehow you're in it." And then she swallowed them whole, the way she'd swallowed everything about that winter for 15 years. "It's nothing," she said. "Long day." He didn't push. He just reached over, without thinking, and gently closed the folder in front of her. "Then stop working. Walk with me. I need air, and I don't want to be alone with what my uncle's lawyers are trying to prove about my father tonight." They walked 11 blocks in the rain without an umbrella, shoulders almost touching, saying very little, and Amara felt something in her chest crack open that she'd kept sealed since she was 17 years old. 2 nights later, the threats escalated. Taeho's lead counsel, a sharp, unblinking litigator named Richard Vance, filed an emergency motion to introduce what he called newly discovered character evidence, the same photograph, now formally entered as an exhibit, alongside an argument suggesting Kian's late father had a documented history of impulsive, unaccountable attachments to vulnerable young women that cast doubt on his mental state when he signed the will. It was a surgical, brutal weaponizing of a single act of mercy, aimed at destroying a dead man's reputation and a living woman's career in the same motion, and Amara understood, reading it at midnight in her apartment, that in a matter of days a courtroom full of strangers would be shown a picture of her at her lowest and be asked to believe it was evidence of a rich man's madness. She thought about withdrawing. She thought about it seriously, for almost an entire night, staring at her ceiling. Then she thought about the boy with the umbrella, who had never once treated her like a problem to be managed, and she picked up her phone instead and called Grace Cho Lindqvist, Taeho's estranged daughter, who taught elementary school in Queens and hadn't spoken to her father in a decade. They met in a coffee shop that smelled like rain-damp coats. "My father didn't hate his brother over the company," Grace said quietly, turning her wedding ring the way people do when they're bracing to say something true. "He hated him because 30 years ago, Kian's father caught my dad embezzling from a small subsidiary and quietly absorbed the loss himself to protect the family name, instead of ruining him publicly. My father has spent 30 years calling that betrayal. It wasn't. It was mercy he never asked for and never forgave." "Which subsidiary?" Amara asked, though something in her chest already knew. "Small import company. Went under that same winter. I don't remember the." "Whitfield Trading," Amara said, and the room seemed to tilt sideways. "Her father's company. The collapse that put her on that street corner in the first place, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big, waiting for a stranger with an umbrella. Kian's father hadn't just happened to save the family fortune that season. He had quietly ruined hers to do it, and 15 years later, his son had found the wreckage of that decision shivering in an alley and given her the only kindness anyone had offered her in months, without either of them ever knowing the debt already connecting them." She sat in her car outside the coffee shop for 20 minutes before she could drive, one hand pressed to her mouth, finally understanding that the boy from the rain, and the men she was falling for in glass conference rooms at midnight were the same person twice over, first by accident, now by choice, and that she was about to have to tell him everything, in the worst possible week, with the whole case hanging in the balance. She told him that night, in his apartment, rain against the windows exactly like it had been 15 years ago. She told him about her father's company, about the 4 months on the street, about a boy who never gave his name, and an umbrella she still dreamed about sometimes. She watched his face change from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like grief. "I looked for you," he said, voice cracking in a way she'd never heard from him in 3 weeks of watching him command boardrooms. "For 2 winters after that, I went back to that corner. My father caught me once, sitting in the car with a spare coat, and I lied and told him it was for a colleague. I never told anyone the truth. I thought I'd imagined how much it mattered." He reached for her hand, slowly, like he was afraid she'd disappear again. "Mara. It was always you." "Don't call me that," she whispered, though she was already crying, already leaning into his hand against her cheek. "That girl doesn't exist anymore. She's sitting right in front of me," he said, defending my family's name in court every single day. "I think she exists more than anyone I've ever met. If this moment just wrecked you a little, that's exactly what it should do," like this video right now, and tell us in the comments if you believe some people are just meant to find each other twice. Because what Amara and Kian didn't know yet was that Richard Vance had a copy of tonight's security footage too, and he was about to use it. 3 days before the hearing, Vance's team leaked a curated clip online, Kian and Amara embracing outside his building, timestamped, edited to suggest an affair between attorney and client that had compromised the entire defense. The story spread fast. A black woman lawyer accused of manipulating a grieving billionaire, a photograph of her homeless past resurfacing beside it, commentators who had never met either of them deciding, loudly, exactly who Amara Whitfield was. Bregman and Cole's managing partners called an emergency meeting and suggested, not gently, that she step down before the hearing to protect the firm. Kian's board suggested the same, for entirely different reasons. For 48 hours it looked like the people trying to destroy his family and the people trying to protect his company had, for once, agreed on something, that Amara didn't belong in that courtroom. She almost let them win. She sat outside the courthouse the morning of the hearing with her resignation letter drafted on her phone, thumb hovering over send, and thought about every year she'd spent making sure no one ever looked at her and saw that girl in the rain again. Then Kian sat down beside her on the courthouse steps, in front of cameras, in front of his own board, and said, loud enough for the reporters to hear, "If she's not my counsel today, I'm not walking in there either." It wasn't performance. It was a man choosing her, publicly, with everything he had to lose. She stood up, smoothed her blazer, and walked in. Subscribe if you're the kind of person who needed to see him choose her out loud like that, because inside that courtroom, Amara was about to give the performance of her career, and the twist coming is one you will not see the whole shape of until it's already happened. Vance opened with the photograph, exactly as threatened, painting Kian's father as an old man too emotionally erratic to be trusted with his own signature. Amara stood, steadied her voice, and did not deny a single fact, she simply reframed all of them. "Counsel is right that I am the girl in that photograph," she said, "and he is right that Kian Cho's father made an unexplainable, unaccountable decision that winter. But it wasn't the decision to help a stranger. It was the decision, that same season, to quietly absorb a 6-figure loss to protect his family's name after his own brother, Tae-ho Cho, embezzled from a subsidiary called Whitfield Trading. My father's company. The company whose collapse is the reason I was homeless in the first place." She entered the forensic accounting records Grace had helped her recover, records tracing the embezzlement directly to Tae-ho, and a matching entry from the same winter funding a shelter partnership on Fifth Avenue, the very shelter Amara had walked into with a stranger's envelope still damp in her hand. "This case was never about a dying man's competency," she said. "It's about a man who spent 30 years quietly cleaning up his brother's crime without asking for credit, including damage that nearly cost me my life, and a brother who cannot forgive being shown mercy he never repaid." The courtroom went dead silent. Vance had no answer ready, because he had built his entire case on a photograph he never understood the second half of. The forensic handwriting report Amara had chased down weeks earlier, recovered, finally, from a backup server Tae-ho's team thought they'd buried, confirmed the will was authentic. Faced with public exposure of his own embezzlement now sitting in the court record, Tae-ho withdrew his contest within the hour rather than let the story go further. Kian's father's legacy and his son's future were safe. Outside, it was raining again, soft and gray, the kind of rain that had once fallen on a 17-year-old girl with nowhere to go. Kian opened an umbrella over both their heads without a word, exactly the way he had 15 years earlier, and for a moment neither of them was a chairman or a lawyer, just two people who had already saved each other once, long before they knew each other's names. I keep thinking about the odds, Kian said. That out of everyone in this city, my father's guilt and my father's mercy both led back to the same person. Maybe it's not odds, Amara said, leaning into him, letting herself, finally, be exactly who she used to be and exactly who she'd become at the same time. Maybe some debts don't close until the people they're owed to are ready to collect them. Before we go, subscribe, share this with someone who needs to believe love and justice can arrive in the same week, and tell us in the comments the biggest lesson you're taking from Amara and Kian tonight. 15 years earlier, a boy had given a stranger an umbrella and told her not to stop believing someone saw her. He never knew her name. He never knew his own father's guilt was quietly funding the shelter that saved her life. And he certainly never imagined that the girl from that rainy corner would grow up to walk into a courtroom and save everything his family had built, while finally letting him see all of her in return. Some kindnesses take 15 years to find their way home. But if you're patient and brave enough to still be standing there when they arrive, they always do, and sometimes, they bring you the rest of your life along with them.